Oh, Joseph, you are still standing today. So we're gonna give you just a little bit of praise. A little bit of praise just for you. Well, you went and you survived, you know what? You know we gotta give you praise. Sing that name. Oh, Joseph, we praise you. And when we do, we'll make it rain. Oh, can I get an amen? Oh, you did it. You survived and you're still alive. Well, for all you do, we praise you.
Joseph Jaffe. That's I believe that's a Japanese name. And but I tell you what, he's not famous. He's famouser than he was or used to was. But fame is fleeting, like a paperweight. It just comes and goes.
We are human, we are animals, we crave the ability to be we. I know it's called me undies. We undies might have sounded differently, right?
Is it a disco now?
Yeah, it's the after party, so it's now we go with the flash.
My goal in life is to be a laptop sticker.
Me too.
And despite the best ministrations of your wife, you still look ugly.
It's a great honor, Mr. Jaffe. It's always nice to be with you.
I'm so happy to be with you. I'm honored.
Thanks for doing this, too. It's a real service to the community.
What a great organization and a show that offers hope, optimism, creative solutions, entertainment.
Thank you for doing this, Joseph. It's your gift to the universe, and it's appreciated.
Very human, and I like that.
Look at you! You are insane!
How did I do that?
You're insane!
Welcome to another episode of Joseph Jaffe is Not Famous. I am enlightened, but still not famous. Why am I enlightened? Because I have a guest that is going to enlighten us. He just wrote a book called The Enlightened Passenger. He's actually written many books, and he is the king of URLs. All shall be revealed soon enough. His name is Corey, and you know, like my lizard brain is saying, don't say Perrier, don't say Perrier, so I won't. Corey Poirier. The EA is like Perrier, but not Perrier, Poirier. Corey Poirier will be my guest on the show. Now, Corey has met Deepak Chopra. I, on the other hand, just have him endorsing my show, and for a bargain basement price on Cameo. Damn it! Oops! I just revealed my trade secrets. It's okay. It's okay. You know, we're all just scrappy entrepreneurs trying to do the best that we can. But anyway, welcome to the show. I start off with my why statement. We're going to be talking about why statements, and who knows, maybe Corey will, he talks about crafting a personal mission statement. Here's mine. As a teacher, facilitator, and coach, I help high aspiring entrepreneurs, owners, and their leadership teams get unstuck, return to growth, and become forever changed. What do I mean by the idea of getting unstuck? Well, I started the show when people were stuck at home, March 2020, or stuck in general. So what do you do when you're stuck? Well, the answer is to get unstuck. And if you do like the show, there are 700 others just like it. bit.ly/subscribe to the show. When we talk about growth, you can grow in terms of top line and bottom line. You can grow your business. You can also grow up in terms of prioritization, in terms of being able to find work-life balance, in terms of having perspective. And I do that through EOS, the Entrepreneurial Operating System. I started a new show because I don't have enough on my plate as a high quick start. So I have a new show called The Entrepreneur's Journey. You can find that on YouTube the channel is called Healthy and Smart, at Healthy and Smart, where I bring on entrepreneurs, thought leaders, coaches, authors, etc., to talk about their entrepreneurial journey. And then Forever Changed, the title of my new book, my sixth book, How a Global Pandemic Changed My Direction, My Purpose, and My Life. And that's how I basically live out my why statement. I've also just made a return to a morning audio first, audio only session. I call it the Collective Cafe. I'm doing it in a new social audio platform called Chatter that is still in private beta, but soon will be publicly available. So Monday through Friday, 8 to 9 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, an opportunity to talk marketing, innovation, entrepreneurship, do live book reads and such. And there is also a podcast version of that. Do you think that I'm doing enough? I feel like I could be doing more. So if you feel that I'm slacking or lazy, you just tell me, and I'll start something else, because that's all I know how to do is just start. Maybe I need to be able to say no, and that is the title of the seated soliloquy. It's called No. Now, Corey's going to be talking about the power of no. I have so many thoughts about no. For example, no could mean not yet or not now. So when a client says to you no, or a prospect says to you no, maybe it means not yet or not now. That no could in fact be turned into a yes with a bit of time and patience and context. But of course, there are other ways to think about no, as in when you say yes. In fact, I just had this conversation the other day with Shoshana Hecht on the entrepreneur's journey. And what we basically came out with, we built on the statement, an intentional yes is a powerful no. The ability sometimes to also, when you say yes to something, you are saying no to something else. But then the third aspect of thinking about this is the ability to say no and be okay with saying no. Maybe it's going to disappoint someone. Maybe it's going to let them down. But you know what's worse? What's worse is actually being able to overpromise and underdeliver. If you say yes to everything, you end up basically being a jack of all trades and master of none. You know, when everything is important, nothing is important. And if you dilute yourself, if you spread yourself too thin, you're just going to end up actually doing everything poorly, badly, or underwhelmingly. So it's powerful, the word no. It's powerful when you can be decisive. It's powerful when you are very clear with the people that you're telling no to, why you said no, what that no means. And you know what? Even if you don't understand today why someone might have said no, or if they don't understand why you said no, hopefully, as the old saying goes, when one door closes, another one opens up. So the connection, the interconnection, the interrelationship between yes and no, they are two sides of a coin. It may be a binary state, or a binary phase, or a binary state of mind, but I would argue that the two are a lot more closely linked and connected than we might even have ever thought or given credit to. But now it's time to say yes to Corey Poirier, who just wrote a book called The Enlightened Passenger. In fact, let me tell you a little bit about him. Corey Poirier is a multiple-time TEDx and sought-after keynote speaker. He's spoken on Mo Mondays and PMX stages, has shared the bill with everyone from John C. Maxwell, I would love to have him on the show, to Deepak Chopra, to Stephen Covey, to General Hillier, and has presented to hundreds of thousands of attendees since he began his speaking journey. Host of the top-rated Conversations with Passion radio show, For the Love of Speaking show, and the founder of the Speaking program. He's been featured in multiple television specials, and he has been featured in and on CBS, CTV, NBC, ABC, other abbreviations, and is one of the few leaders featured twice on the popular Entrepreneur on Fire show with Mr. Dumas. He's been on the show before as well. A columnist with Entrepreneur and Forbes, he has also interviewed over 4,000 of the world's top leaders. One of the most recent talks took him to New York City, where he had the extreme pleasure of speaking to at-risk youth at the Brooklyn Navy Yard Boys and Girls Club. Wow. A father to his young son, Sebastian, boyfriend to Shelley, and a father to 3 fur babies, Corey is also a practicing yogi and Rock Recording of the Year nominee. I finally found someone who's as busy as I am. Corey, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you so much, Joseph. I'm so super stoked to be here. And I love your tagline, enlightened but not famous. I feel like I'm sort of the same, and I'm not even fully enlightened yet. I'm just moving closer to.
I feel like you're not doing enough. I feel like you could be doing more. Like, do you ever get that feeling that you could be doing more?
Yeah, much like yourself, I'm putting it out there to people that if you feel that I am not doing enough, let me know so I can add more to my plate as well. Yeah, it's a constant struggle to find enough to do. That's for sure.
So you can, well, we're going to talk about the power of no and saying no. And, I obviously threw a couple of different thoughts or riffs on the word no in my seated soliloquy because, we need more intelligence, we need more perspective, we need more thought leadership on something as simple as NO, just 2 letters, and opening and closing so many doors. But we'll get to that. But first, I thought we'd have a little bit of fun. And do you want to play a little game called 2 Truths and a Lie?
I sure do. Absolutely.
Well, I haven't actually done this in a while, and I'm so happy to see what good what kind of a liar you are, my friend.
Well, and I'm going to try my poker face so that nobody can figure that out either.
All right, so we twist and turn reality. 2 of these items are true. 1 of them is not. The first is apparently you started watching Bruce Lee movies around the age of 4. And according to this authentic image, you were actually in Bruce Lee movies as well. I would never have pegged you for a martial arts expert. So tell us about Bruce Lee movies at the age of 4, no less.
Yeah, well, first of all, I've kind of gained a little bit of weight since that photo was taken, or like the screenshot taken right from the movie. But I was, my mother and father were big Bruce Lee fans. And so they, not only did I watch them at that age, they brought me to the movie theater when that was legally allowed, because as we know now, that would be shunned upon. So I got to go to see these movies before I even really fully understand what these movies were. And my mother was a big fan of Bruce Lee.
So what can we learn from Bruce Lee? Now, he died young or prematurely. I forget, how did he die, by the way?
That is basically, there's so much speculation on it. I don't know that I could give a real answer, but the answer that seems to come up the most is basically like, well, that he had something happen, like basically a migraine headache that was really something deeper, or something internally exploded, but not like in the context of blowing up his body, because that's in the movie side, that's what we'd say. But the most common, like I say, I've heard is that he had like a brain hemorrhage or something like that.
Now, I remember Bruce Lee movies growing up in South Africa. I remember also going and watching Terrence. I don't know if you ever, did you ever meet or know of Terrence Hill and Bud Spencer?
No,
so, and I think it was Italian and was weirdly dubbed. Being in South Africa, growing up in the 70s and 80s, we took what we could get in terms of what was smuggled into the country. Country was going through some times, some challenging times, one might say. What did you learn from Bruce Lee that, if anything, that you've carried with you and has shaped you or influenced you in your professional career?
Yeah, so happy to share that. And I'll say I looked it up because I was curious how close I was. And it said what I was kind of saying, a swelling of the brain, which was caused by an allergic reaction to a headache medication. That's the official cause of death. But of course, so many people believe a hex was put on him by the Kung Fu community and stuff like that. There's a lot of things. Or in the Game of Death movie that he died in, that a real bullet was put in, similar to what happened to his son. Like, there's so many theories. What I learned from Bruce Lee...
And I don't think, by the way, Alec Baldwin was in that movie, but that's a different story for a different day.
Totally different story.
Exactly.
But I can tell you some of the things I learned from him. One of his big quotes or sayings was about be water, or be like water. And so be fluid like water. And I kind of carry that around with me, because to me it means be flexible. So try not to push so hard, be detached from outcomes, but also be flexible when stuff happens. with the path you take. So like, it doesn't have to work out exactly as you vision it. It's like people, when they try to manifest, they're always like, I want a purple cow in my yard today. And I think we have to be a bit more flexible than that. Like, I want to have abundance when it comes to my milk, like food and milk, versus like, I want a purple cow in my yard. And so I think, to me, that's where the flexibility comes in.
I think that would work for Seth Godin, a fellow, a fellow good-looking gentleman without hair. But yeah, I mean, I love the connection, and of course, I've always loved the analogy that says, when there is a giant rock in the middle of a river or a stream, the water, of course, does not try and beat it down. The water goes around, but over time and with reps, and that boulder is reduced to pebbles and ultimately sand. And so you get to the outcome. It just might take you a while.
Yeah, I heard Shannon Lee, Bruce's daughter, tell a story one time about her office that she had where a water leak started, and how they tried to like stop the water all over, like putting stuff up to stop the water. And it wasn't until after the water won and they lost that she realized how poetic it was, that no matter what they tried to stop, the water still found a way through. But to your point, it didn't try to force its way in. Like, it didn't try to pound its way in. And, Bruce talked about how you can punch water all you want. You're never going to hurt water. It'll just form around your hand. So I just think there's a lot of good metaphors that come just from that concept of be water.
Well, you can try and be water or punch water, or you can end up getting on American Idol and be a rock star. You apparently wrote your first song at the age of 12. And, normally I like to have a little bit of fun with very bad Photoshop. But in this case, I just decided to go with Daughtry himself, because, I mean, it's like staring in a mirror. It's not like Arnold Schwarzenegger and Danny DeVito. I mean, Daughtry would be DeVito and you'd be Schwarzenegger. There's no doubt. But I'm sure you've been referred to Daughtry before. You must have been.
I'm trying to do the same face, by the way. I think maybe once or twice. It's going to sound weird, and I don't even know how we would find the photo, but the guy I've been referred to the most, and I don't even remember his actual real name, but he played a character, I think Fernandez was the name, on Prison Break. So the guy that plays the character, I think Fernandez on Prison Break, is the guy I've actually been compared to a lot. Daughtry I've heard once or twice, but that guy I heard a lot. I don't know why.
So tell us a little bit about your singer-songwriter career and how performance and performing arts has impacted your life. And you'll notice this interesting little common theme, which is why I go ahead and ask fun facts about guests, is because you just learn so much about them, but also how it influences and impacts, everything from that moment on.
Yeah. So, I mean, for me, music has always been a major part of my life. I grew up an 80s music guy, like listening to Motley Crue and Poison and those bands. And I picked up guitar when I was really young. I was absolutely terrible at it. Couldn't tune a guitar by ear, had to start from scratch. And I think I was around 10 when my uncle gave me a beat up, rotten looking guitar that I just kept playing. To be honest, I was spoiled and one of those people that quit a lot of stuff. And somehow I stuck with it. And yeah, so I ended up writing a song when I was 12 called Waiting. And the funny part is I knew how to play regular chords. We'll call them country chords, regular chords at the time. But I didn't know how to play what we call power chords. And yet I wrote this song with power chords, not knowing they were the correct chords, only to later figure out what the actual chords were, like so D and C or whatever. And so I thought that was fascinating that I was able to write a song. It makes sense put my fingers in a place that I didn't know were actually the proper place to put it. And it actually was 3 real chords structured just a different way.
That's a brilliant story because it really has a very straight line, direct line to this idea that when we overthink, when we head trash, when we convince ourselves, when we have a scarcity mindset, when we believe we're not good enough to do something, we'll talk ourselves out of it. And in your particular case, you were able to do something without even realizing you were doing it. It's not dissimilar to when you teach a kid how to swim, right? And eventually you're like, you do realize that I wasn't even holding on to you. You're swimming by yourself. So I love that story.
Yeah, and I will say to that point, I will say that as far as music, because you asked how it impacted my life, in the bigger picture, it impacted my life in a lot of ways because of the fact that music requires, almost like sports. Like if you play sports, it requires different things that you learn. Just like being in the military, you learn certain skills and habits. And so like in sports, you learn teamwork, cooperation, all that kind of stuff. And I find in music, if you end up playing with other artists, other bands, you learn how to work with each other, how to let each other shine, how to, again, collaborate with a team. Because if I screw up playing a chord, then it screws up the whole band. Or you just notice something's wrong with the music. And so it requires everybody to be on the same team, work together, help each other shine. You also learn about, writing a song on the artistic side. You learn about creating. You learn about what it's like to be artistic. Like, so the one thing about music is I feel like without realizing it, it has impacted the rest of my life.
And we've just had our producers go and do a little bit of research just to verify, in fact, and it's, once again, it's like looking in a mirror. This is Fernando Sucre from Prison Break. So, yeah, I mean, it's like staring in a mirror.
But I'm looking, the one in the far top left, or actually the one next to it, is I think the picture that somebody used when they said I looked like him. I think it was the far left one. But anyway, yeah. So
I'm not going to lie. That is the person that I thought I was booking on the show. So, for me, it's been an upgrade. It's been an absolute upgrade. So like I was like, what am I going to talk to him about? Breaking out of prison? But now I can talk about nose. I can talk about music. I can talk about shark-infested waters, because the final fun fact, whether this is true or not, is that you once rescued a dog from shark-infested waters. So entering the danger, if you will. Tell us about this story.
So this is, so I got to be clear. There's a little bit of a twist with this. It's that because the shark-infested waters, I maybe Hollywoodized that a little bit. It was waters, like it was a beach where the lifeguard said that a shark has been reported over the last few days. And they didn't know if it was the same shark or different sharks. They just said, there's been people reporting it. And I have a dog named Angel, who is actually a Cocker Spaniel. And so she was out in the water. We were kind of playing on the beach. She was out in the water. And basically they yelled shark. So I didn't see a shark. I should add a caveat to this, as I'm not a very good swimmer. I'm actually not super brave in the water, but I also love my dog. So I just ran out, grabbed her, ran in really quickly, and people said they saw a shark. So I don't know how close I was to being eaten, but I still technically went into waters where sharks were reported to save my dog, Angel.
Well, you are an angel for rescuing a dog. If you definitively know which one of those three facts was a lie, you can go ahead and vote at bit.ly/2T1L_Corey Poirier. And one person will win $1 million. And that might have been a lie. So there you go. So thank you for playing, Corey. A little bit of fun. We get to know you. We get to see how well you lie. And let's get on with the show. And what rhymes with show is the power of no. So let's go back to the seated soliloquy. What did you think? What is your particular angle when you think about this very, very short word with two letters? What does no mean to you?
So when I was growing up, I grew up in a small town, and no to me was a 4-letter word. So when I say that, it wasn't a 2-letter word. It was like a 4-letter word in the sense that it was something you should never speak. I was taught, growing up in a small town, that you just said yes to everybody and then figured how to do it later. And, I was raised, my grandfather was a carpenter with a grade 3 education. And he always taught me, just say yes to everybody and say yes to everything. And you'll, people will like you more, and you'll have more of an audience, and so on and so forth. So I was always taught to say yes to everybody. And then what I started doing is I started interviewing people to learn what they were doing differently than me. And ended up interviewing thousands of thought leaders. And one of the things I discovered is that they say no on average 20 to 50 times more than the average person. So meaning the people that I was wanting to emulate, or maybe the people who were impacting the lives I wanted to impact, were saying no over and over again. And meanwhile, I was thinking it was about saying yes. And so what that meant is I had to start exploring that more. And then what I'll call working once I figured out it was a real thing. And it makes sense when you look at it from the outside in, is the busier you get in life, the more you say yes, it means you're saying no to other things. And if you keep saying yes, 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 then you quickly and you get maxed out, it means there's a few other things that you would have liked to say yes to that you never can because you're way too maxed now. And so it makes sense that high achievers figure out what yeses are and what nos are, and then say no over and over again, unless it's a real, absolute yes. And so it made sense to me because I was like, how could they juggle? Like, how could Tony Robbins juggle as much as he does, I should say, if he was saying yes to every request for him to endorse a book, every request for him to come and speak at a summit or on a podcast? It's impossible. So first of all, I discovered that thought leaders say no way more often. Secondly, I've discovered that in a lot of cases, the bigger the thought leader, the more they have to have an infrastructure to do it for them. Meaning like Tony Robbins' team probably says no 400 times a week. But Tony doesn't even know most of those no's were said. They just know what to kind of keep out. And so the first part is understanding that if you say yes to one thing, you're saying no to something else, and you should be more careful with your time when you say yes and no. The next thing is to realize if you can't say no, you might have to have somebody that does it for you. Third thing I would say is to realize that you can't take what Corey's advice and go to work and tell your boss no over and over again without running into problems. So you also have to figure out what a no and a yes is depending on the part of your life you're saying no and yes to. And so, at work, you might sit down with your boss and say, what really is a no and a yes, so that if you can say no to somebody else that asks you to take something on that might be in a different department. So I'm not saying say no and yes to your boss is what I'm trying to say. What I'm saying is if you're an entrepreneur, then you may have to get really careful with how and when you say no. And, we can explore how I figure out what a no is quickly, how to say no and build up that muscle. But ultimately, the takeaway is that high achievers use the supernatural power of no to become more sane, to juggle more in general, and to also at the same time not get overwhelmed.
Yeah, I want to know. I want to know. I want to know exactly how you get to know. I have to say that as a passionate creator, entrepreneur myself, that has been told no so many times, it's the ultimate deflating. It is so frustrating being told no, being rejected all the time, and oftentimes by handlers. I reaching out to a guy like Stephen Bartlett, Diary of a CEO, and just knowing that I just want to be able to get to him, get in front of him, shoot my shot, be able to share, and knowing that he has this army of handlers that are just blocking and thinking in my mind, obviously it's idealistic, it's romantic, that they're missing out, that they're making the mistake. And if only I had the chance to pitch him. And I know it's just, it's childish and immature, because the hope would be that they are attuned to being very judicious and careful and about what they say yes or no to.
Yeah, it's a great point, because at the end of the day, when you're trying to reach, for example, celebrities to do interviews, it's a totally different game. And the reason is most of the time, the handlers or agents or managers who only get paid if they get them a paid gig. So to your point, if they don't have a book or something to promote and you go to a celebrity, right away, the agent's probably thinking there's no money in this for any of us. So that's a no. And so because you're not reaching them directly and they don't see, like you said, how amazing this opportunity is, you wonder how many times a no is said that they would have said, actually, that's a hard yes. if they knew what the opportunity was. But again, the challenge is when you come with the idea of, hey, is there any chance I can get them on my program or what have you? If they don't have anything to promote, their thoughts are, well, depending on the level of celebrity, they can get on good, Entertainment Tonight. And so, yeah, we'd love to think it would definitely be easier if we could get everybody scheduled. But yeah, it is challenging and frustrating that in certain ways the handler might be just operating from a perspective of, I'm just going to say no to everything unless it's somebody that knows them already, or unless it's something where we know it's a big opportunity or there's money involved. And by the way, I've tested this because I've tried different things where it's been an event I'm running where we actually have a bit of a budget to pay somebody. And it's funny, Joseph, how quick the reply comes back whenever you're at least bringing up the idea that, hey, we have a bit of a budget to pay them.
Yeah, what do they say? It's all trash until it's cash.
I've never heard that one before. I love that. It's all
trash until it's cash. No, I think that's a great point. And what I was there are a couple of the thing that jumped into my mind is this idea of guardrails and guidelines, a rubric, the ability to be very clear. So I know that you have your own. You were going to talk about how to get to that no or whatever. And another one that's just a framework, which I'm sure you know, is the Venn diagram. There's hell no and there's hell yes, and everything in the middle is just hell. And so sometimes it helps when it's a hard yes or a hard no. I think where it becomes really tricky and icky and confusing and ambiguous, it are those 256 shades of gray. How do you get better at those 256 shades of gray when it isn't readily apparent when it is a hard yes or a hard no?
So for me, what I did, and it served me very well, is I crafted what I call my personal mission statement, or you could call it a purpose statement. But I call it my personal mission statement. And really, it's exactly what a mission statement is. I was in a company one time, and I was looking at the fact that, I was looking at the sidewall, and I noticed that they actually had a mission statement, a company mission statement. And I was like, that's a pretty profound statement. You could see how they can operate and make decisions based on that statement alone. And I was like, why don't people have mission statements? Like, why doesn't the average person have a mission statement? So I crafted this mission statement. I don't know if I have my wallet handy, but it's right in my wallet. It's handwritten, and it says to be the guy that motivates, donates, educates, entertains, and inspires. And what that means to me is that ultimately, if somebody asks me to take something on, then I just go back to that list and say, how many of those is it? So if one of those is donate, and then the person that's trying to book me, is openly trying to, let's say, rip off customers, that's not giving back. So that could be an easy no. So I can kind of look at it like from a moral perspective, how does this relate to my different 5-point test? And then secondly, when I look at it just logistically, how many of those does it hit? So if it's 0 of those 5, then it's an easy no without regret. If it's 4 or 5 of those 5, it's an easy yes without regret. Meaning if somebody says, hey, do you want to come to our event and speak? And, we'd like you to educate the audience and make them laugh as well. At the same time, we're willing to donate $500 to the charity of your choice, also as part of bringing you here. Would you be interested? Well, that's 4 easy 4 of those 5. That's an easy yes. Don't even have to think twice. If, like I said, if they say, we want to bring you to an event, we're going to promote your name, but unfortunately, we can't pay you anything. And, we want you at the door collecting money and so on and so forth. That's an easy no without regret. Or if even if you look at like a show, if somebody said, do you want to be on the show, and it's a show about knitting, then, you got to find a pretty good angle on the knitting show for it to make sense for me to go on that show. But if you wanted to bring me on a show that's about finding your purpose or how to say no, like we're talking about now, or things like that, that's an easier yes. So I just wanted to give a visual to it, but that's kind of how I decide what a no and a yes is. That's not necessarily how to say it, but that's how I decide this is a no or this is a yes. So how does it work and align with what I have planned and what I want to do?
I understand that very clearly. And in a way, even though there's a kind of a quantification, a checklist, it just helps sometimes to be able to sort through and even delegate to a team or an assistant. I was thinking that I have a bunch of yeses and no thoughts, so kind of throw them at you and see what you think. I've often said that these days I feel it's easy to get to no. It's much harder to get to yes. And if you think about a client buying something or being able to invest in, whether it's coaching, consulting, or whatever the case may be, or experimenting with a new tool or technology or platform, I think it's so much easier just to say no. No without the qualification, without the rubric. It's much harder or challenging to get to yes, which is exactly, it's almost counter to the entire discussion we've had, because that's where you were born from. But I know that there's a corollary to that, which is how do we get people to be more comfortable to actually say yes? Because when the pendulum swings too far in the other direction, we actually end up being afraid of everything, including our own shadow.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question, because the other thing is there's two within, I'll say within the context of this whole discussion, there's two angles as well, right? There's which person are you? Are you the person trying to keep somebody out? Or are you the person trying to get in? And so don't kid yourself. On one hand, I'm trying to, keep my life sane by saying no to the things that really just don't fit, and sometimes feeling guilty about doing it. But at the other end of the spectrum, I'm trying to get to yes. When people say, how did you interview all these people? Well, I had to try to get to yes. And so I think I'll say it this way. First of all, you have to get to the audience, the end audience in general. So like, for example, if you're going through Tony Robbins' team and Tony never catches wind of it, the only other way you're going to get to yes is if Tony's team member also knows somebody or you have an in there or something. But otherwise, Tony's not even going to know you asked the question. And so I feel like, first of all, and it's not always doable and it won't always happen, but first of all, you have to get to the quote unquote decision maker, the actual person you're trying to reach. If you can't get to them, your next best step is to get to the person that's their main handler, like the one person that can say yes even for them. And in a lot of cases, there is a person that can say yes on their behalf. Now, I'm not going to say do this, but Tony Robbins' wife, for instance, if you were in some sort of coaching program she had, and she loved what you did, I'm pretty sure she could convince Tony to give you some time. So what I mean is there's always a person that can help. And so the closer you can get to 6 degrees of separation, the closer you can get to that 1 degree, the better chance you have. And so I'm going to get to your point about the, how do we make it comfortable? Because the first part I'm talking about is how do you even get to the point where there could be a yes? And I believe you have to get either creative, you have to figure out a way to make it a win for them. But I think ultimately, when you're finally presenting to them, you need to make it more comfortable to say yes than to say no. So you have to make it so like it's a no-brainer. What I'm trying to think of who it is. I think it might be Alex Hormozy, who has one of his 3 books that he put out in the last few years, where he basically talks about something like how to make them feel so, if they say no to this, they'd almost have to feel dumb. Like how to make it so that you're like, I can't believe I said no to that. And so, but how you do that is you make it easier for them. So you have to, if you got a minute with them, you have to explain why it's a good fit for them, why it's a win for them. But I'm going to go one step further and say, there's a sexy answer and a non-sexy answer. So this is maybe diving in because people ask me often, how did you get in front of so-and-so? How did you get so-and-so's attention? So there's a strategic way, sexy way, and then a non-strategic way, non-sexy way. The sexy strategic way is to be really creative in how you approach the person. So for example, Jack Canfield was one of my first big gets. So Jack is the co-creator of Chicken Soup for the Soul. And I reached out, and quite frankly, I had 0 listeners on my podcast, and I was approaching him about being on my podcast with 0 listeners. Now, I will say my opening line wasn't, I have 0 listeners. What I did was I didn't talk about listeners. And the reason I say I have 0 listeners is because I hadn't released my first episode. So how dare I have the nerve to reach out to Jack Canfield as one of my first guests ever on my new show? But that's what I did. So I went to his team and they said, Jack's saying no 9 out of every 10 times because he doesn't have anything he's promoting or working on right now. So they said, Corey, it's probably going to be a no, but feel free to check back. So once every few weeks, I checked back and it was still a no. And then I decided I got to get creative. So what I did was I went on Jack's website and I looked at who was endorsing Jack. By the way, kind of ironic when I look here. I don't know if you can see this here, Joseph, but right behind me on the other side is a picture of me and Jack Canfield. So, but anyway, that's a side note. But yeah, so what I did was I looked in Jack's site and I said, who's endorsing him? Because I figured if somebody's endorsing him, he probably respects them. So I found a guy named Dan Sullivan. Dan Sullivan's with a company called Strategic Coach. Dan's not as out there as Jack. And so I said, Dan might be a little easier to reach at least get to his team. And so I went to Dan's team, rather, and I went to them and said, hey, I just heard Dan on Success Magazine's CD interview with Darren Hardy, which was true. And here's a clip of my interview style. I think you'll see it's very close. I think Dan would like the show. So like, yeah, well, Dan just said that was his favorite interview he'd ever done. So yeah, let's do it. And so I got on the show with Dan and I kept bringing up Jack. And I found out in the interim that Jack and Mark Victor Hansen at the time were paying $25,000 to go to Dan's and I think Joe Polish's event each year. So I'm like, Dan's really like Jack's coach in a way. And so what I did was I brought him up, and then Dan at some point in the interview said, you know, Corey, Jack would love this show. You should get him on the show and you should tell him Dan said so. So then what I did was I cut that clip out. I sent it to Jack's team and I said, even Dan, Jack's coach, thinks Jack should be on my show with me. And their reply was something to the effect of, Corey, you've beaten us into submission. Here's Jack's scheduling link. And so that's the sexy answer. The unsexy answer is, well, part of, I guess, the sexy answer is then that's the first domino. And so now I have actually 2 dominoes knocked down, Jack and Dan. So now I can go to Mark Victor Hansen, who co-wrote with Jack and also went to Dan's events, and say, hey, Mark, your 2 friends are on my show. You should come on the show. And you see what I'm getting at there. Now you're starting to knock down a domino over time. Now you have 30 dominoes knocked down. It's easy to knock the 31st. But the other side, the non-sexy side, and this is, I can tell you quicker, but it's the part that people don't want to hear because it takes more work, is I look at these relationships like a bank. And so I go to the bank saying, how many times can I deposit before I ever withdraw? Alex Hormozy summed this up really quick on a podcast episode recently. He said, somebody told me that he said this, something to the effect of, the longer you delay your ask, the bigger your ask can be. And so for me, when I look at the relationships that I built with, say, a Mark Victor Hansen or Lisa Nichols or Richard Paul Evans, who wrote the Christmas Box and 46 New York Times bestselling books, and on and on. When James Redfield wrote Celestine Prophecy, I basically tried to give to them over and over and over again before I ever asked for a thing. So Mark in particular, I think it was like 4 years that I'd known him. I'd done 3 interviews at the time. He told me one time on the air he wanted to get on some podcasts because he had a new book out. And within about a week, I sent him 25 large podcasts. And then he's like, Corey, enough. Okay, we're booked now. We're enough. But my point is, I did that much for him, and I still hadn't asked for a thing. So I feel like I built up the relationship bank to the point where even if I take a withdrawal, there's still more left over. So, Joseph, that's the non-sexy answer because it takes work to put in time to the relationship. But that's, to me, both of those scenarios makes it easy to say yes. The first scenario, I got the kind of social proof from one of Jack's mentors, Dan Sullivan. That was one thing. So make it easy to say yes. Well, if Dan said yes, and I trust Dan, and he said I should be on this, well, I should listen to Dan. Then the other side is the non-sexy is to put in the time of the relationship. And then it makes it easy for them to say yes because they're like, look how much Corey's done for me without ever expecting a thing in return. So that's my more.
So the longer you delay your ask,
yeah,
the bigger the ask will be. Is that what you said?
Yeah, the bigger the ask can be.
Oh, the word can is much better than will, right?
Yeah, exactly.
It's great. And actually, if you just put it all together, Corey, it's really just about the long game. You know, it's the quick fix, the quick hit. But by the way, they both work. I mean, I've had 700 guests on the show. I've had Dan Pink and Tom Peters and Carol Baskin and Frank McCourt and Patrick Fabian and Robin DeAngelo and I get those questions too. But I'll tell you, I'm not as strategic as you are. I'm definitely not as sexy as you either. But I don't think longer term and bigger picture. I'm much more, on a whim and out on a limb. And I think you've given me some really great food for thought, which is when there is a plan, a structure, a roadmap, when there is method to the madness, why not win on both counts? You will sometimes get lucky and get the quick hit or the quick win. But if you're actually in it to win it in the long haul, And I think for people watching this, there's so many great lessons. And thank you for sharing, Corey, because, at the end of the day, we give up too soon. We don't have that relentlessness, that endurance, that stamina, that persistence, and you need it, especially in tough economic times.
Yeah, and I'll tell you the creative side, trying to be creative. Here's an example as well, just an example of how I try to do things a little different. But this is a picture of the new book, The Enlightened Passenger. And one of the things, I was trying to find a different one, but one of the things we did is when we mail it to people, we send it with a ticket, so a plane ticket. And the plane ticket says from, in this case, Los Angeles to Enlightenment, and then as the person's name. And so I'm trying to think of an example of one I can tell you about. Mark Victor Hansen, let's say, if I use that example. He, when I sent it to him and Crystal, his wife, each a copy of the book, and I had each of them gave their own ticket. And they said, Corey, we got home and we were busy, and we were like, oh, Corey's book's here, but we were going to move away. But then we saw the plane ticket, said, wait, what? He sent us a plane ticket? And then it made them stop and look. And then the plane ticket's, like I say, very intentional. Like it says, like I say, from the place that they actually live to Enlightenment. It says the time, by the way, the date was the pub date, so June 25th, which is the date the book's officially being sent out in the mail. The seat in the on the flight ticket is actually the seat that main character sits in on the plane. So it was all thought out, but it's the idea, if you see a plane ticket, you're going to say, where am I going? And at least get you to a pattern interrupt. What I'm getting at with that is the idea was to be creative, because a lot of these people that we send it to could get 1,000 books in a year. What's going to make them stop and see my book? And so if I just leave the book alone, it may or may not. I had a message back from a big name influencer, and the title of the message was Your Book. That was the whole title. And then she said, Corey, I just got back from, if I had time, I'd pick up the book to read it properly. But I think it was like, I just got back from somewhere, I forget, overseas somewhere. And there were like 3 or 4 flight delays. Took me 2 extra days to get home. I got home to a bunch of mail, and there was your book. And she said, I get like 400 or 500 books a year, and I read 0 of those books. Unless it's somebody I know that sent it, but it wasn't me. Like, she didn't know me. And she said, I don't know what you have. She said some sort of manifesting juju. She said, but I sat down. I saw the plane ticket after I just got back from a flight. It pulled my attention in, and I saw how small your book was. So I literally read the whole book in one sitting. So this is somebody that I would have never been able to get a hold of via email or anything else. But she messaged me. I didn't even say, I didn't message her and say, did you get the book? What we did is on the front of the book, we just put my email address. That if you have any questions, send me a message, whatever. She literally came out of her way to send me an email. It puts me in a better position. But how it happened is because of trying to be creative with the book. So I do want people to take away the idea that try to go to the Y axis when everybody else is going to the X.
I love it. So eloquent. Go to the Y, zig when the others are zagging. By the way, talk about creativity. I mean, if you will look next to the man's name, Mr. Poirier's name, you will notice www.thisisthebook. This is the book URL takes you to this website. Your actual speaker website is That Speaker Guy. You have been exceptionally creative in terms of using URLs to brand, to differentiate, to be conversation starters. And I noticed it, and I love it.
Well, I mean, thank you so much. I think it has become one of my things that I do that. But where it all started, in fact, was with a comment. So somebody saw me at an event, and they said, hey, you're that speaker guy. And then somebody else was there and said, oh yeah, I know you. You are that speaker guy. And then I noticed, I think it was like a couple months later, somebody else said, aren't you that speaker guy? And so it happened 3 times. And I said, okay, there's something here. So literally on my email signature and everywhere else, we always used to say that speaker guy. And then I started saying, well, maybe I should check if that domain's available. So I registered thatspeakerguy.com. And then it occurred to me, it's like, when you do that, it's like, it's the one, it's kind of implied it's the one and only. So then I launched a book, which the name has changed since, but it used to be called The Book of Public Speaking. So it's like the one book on public speaking. We changed it after that because we realized, even though it was clever and catchy, the book really at its heart wasn't meant for people that just want to learn how to speak. It was actually meant for how to get paid doing it. So we did change the title of the book to Get Paid to Speak. That's what it's called now. I have a podcast of the same name. But my point is, that was my approach to a lot of stuff. Like, I wanted to be the one, the only. I still have the speaking program. So it's like, it's all the way through the different layers of the brands. I think I mentioned off air, but for one of my audiobooks, it's thebookofwhyaudio.com. Like, it's across the board, and it was very intentional, and it gets commented on a lot. So I'm glad it was intentional.
I mean, I am in the Corey Poirier camp. My previous company called Evolution, our URL was Startup for Brands, and that was essentially our elevator pitch. That's what we did. We created, we match-made startups and brands. So I love the URL that actually it's more than a tagline. It actually tells you tells people what you do. I also love the power of course, the versus right? It's not, this is the book. This is not, this is a book, right? This is the guide, not a guide. Now you've done something else creatively, of course. And by the way, let me restate or reframe Corey's 1, 2, 3 punch, because I've been paying attention. Number 1 is the long game, right? You've got to be in it to win it. Number 2 is creativity, customization and personalization versus the lazy cut and paste, dear influential speaker, right? Dear influential blogger. And the third one I would say is pay attention. I found this with my show as well. People kept on leaving the show and saying that was so much fun. And I was like, what do you mean fun? This is serious. This is business. I'm like, no, fun. This is what they're taking away. So note to self, be more funner. And so I try and be funner all the time. So 1, 2, 3, pay attention. If people are telling you something, lean into it, embrace it as opposed to resisting it. So Corey, thank you for that little masterclass. But now let's talk about another master stroke. Let's talk about the book, The Enlightened Passenger, because this seems to be like you've fused fiction and nonfiction. You've created a business book that doesn't read like a business book. Yeah, I mean, that's such a great, in a lot of ways, summary of it, or a great way to, I'll call it, assess it. It's a fictional parable, and at its heart, I believe it is a self-help book without being a self-help book. So what does that mean? Well, it means without being like, here's the 5 steps for this. This is what I always tell people to do. It's not like tell you. It's more like a share with you. And in a lot of ways, I've often joked and said, it's almost a way to trick you into learning without you realizing you're learning. So it's more like books like the Celestine Prophecy or The Alchemist, or Augmendino wrote a lot of parables. But The Richest Man in Babylon's another one, Monk Who Sold His Ferrari. It's that type of book where almost all those books, which I found out over the years, are loosely based on the author's life. This book is a fictionalized version of my life, but we don't kind of beat you over the head with, here's how to do it. What we do in the book is we share a story. And because it's 2 strangers on a plane, older, wiser guy teaching the younger, maybe a little bit arrogant business guy, the older guy does say, hey, are you ready for lesson 5? So we do kind of keep you on track with the lessons. And at the end of each chapter, it says, lesson 5 or whatever the lesson was. We struggled with whether or not to include that or not in the book. And those books I mentioned, some like the Celestine doesn't have that. But Augmendino's, when he wrote about 10 scrolls and the greatest salesman in the world, he actually listed all this. He listed the scrolls. So at the end of each chapter, and then at the end, here's the 10 scrolls. And I struggle with which was the better way to do it, because we are trying to get you to read a story where you ultimately learn without realizing you're learning. But what I decided, Joseph, is I wanted this book to be also for the spiritual skeptic. It's not a super spiritual book, but the parts we talk about, like synchronicity, that some people might not believe in or never heard of, that's where I ultimately decide to include the lessons. Because if you hear about synchronicity, which another way to say that is meaningful coincidences. But if you hear about like what people call a coincidence, but you place a meaning on it, for people that don't understand that, they're just like, yeah, that sounded great. What do I do with that? So we wanted to have takeaways from the chapter. So one of them is start writing in a synchronicity journal. So start writing when they happen, and you'll see more of them. And this is, by the way, my synchronicity journal right here. This is a new one I just started. But if you look at the beginning, you can actually see like April 26th when it happened, May,
Like this is my synchronicity journal where it shows the things that happen. And so I keep track of them. And what I found is because I do that, I get more of them. Whether that's because the universe says, oh, you want more of these, you like them, or whether that's I just see them more often now because I keep track of them, I don't really care. All I know is I get more of them. So in the book, the idea with the lessons was to say, here's what you can do now with this. So I'm partly telling you what the book's about because it is about two strangers on a plane. One wants to learn how to make money from the older guy because he realizes he's an eccentric guy who's made money. Ultimately, what he learns is called The Flight That Changes Everything. Ultimately, what he learns is how to become a richer person in the process. But at the same time, as far as the lessons, they're the 10 lessons that I've learned after 7,500 interviews. And they're the lessons that if I was locked in a room with my kids for 24 hours, my two sons, what I would teach them. So I actually removed a couple of lessons because they didn't feel like it's the most important ones. So that's kind of what you get when you read the book. But if I go back for a second to why I created that part about the lessons and how I want to reach people is there's the practical side of the book, like the power of no, which of course anybody anybody can use that. Anybody can learn something about power of no or writing a mission statement. But when you talk about synchronicity, there's some people that are like, that's pseudoscience, dude. That's witchcraft. And so I was a skeptic most of my life. I actually call myself a recovering spiritual skeptic. Because of that, I wanted to reach the people that normally nobody reaches. All the gurus of the spiritual world don't reach because it mostly what they're teaching at a level that's going to reach the people that are already kind of sold. And that's awesome. But I want to reach the people that aren't necessarily sold. And I'll tell you, I had a comment from an email I sent the other day that made it all worthwhile. It said it's done its job. There's a lady and she said I could share it. Her name is Lisa Demi. She's a speaker. And I sent out an email from my newsletter that said, do you believe in synchronicity? And then it was just a thing about synchronicity. And her total reply was, after reading your book, I now do. You know, when you think about that, Joseph, like something as big as like the law of attraction or synchronicity, how many times in life do you go talk to somebody and what you said makes them go, you know what? I finally believe it or get it. That doesn't happen very often. So if my book reached one person who wasn't sold on synchronicity and now says, oh my God, you know what, this stuff happening, maybe it's happening for me and not to me. Maybe this is actually, here's the meaning behind it. If that happened to me, it was worth it. So I went on a bit of a tangent, but hopefully I kind of explained the book at the same time as explaining who I kind of wrote it for, which is people that are already kind of sold, that need a reminder, and people that need that extra boost. Like they need the secret to come along and share with them what the law of attraction was. That's more of a metaphor in the sense that the secret came along and had my friends who never would have talked about that in their life saying, I'm going to manifest stuff. And the same with Celestine Prophecy came along. My wife will tell you that was the first book that made her think she wasn't crazy because of the way it talked about spirituality. Well, I'm not trying to say I'm going to become that author of that book, but I'm saying that's kind of the goal. Let's introduce some new people to something they never would have bought into before. So,
but if you manifest it and if you actually put the energy and the frequency out there into the world, then what do you mean? It's not an if, it's a when. It's inevitable.
That's a true story.
It better be. It
better
be.
Now that I'm sold, meaning now that I've grown and evolved and maybe more enlightened, I know that for a fact now. But I was the guy, like I say, when I was younger, saying that's pseudoscience. You know, I didn't. And my mother, by the way, used to take me to tarot readings and tea leaf readings and drug me to all these places. And my wife is a shamanistic healer and a Reiki master. So you would think I'm circled by it, but I was fighting it for a long time.
You know, I found this quote for you, and it says, "It is a great evil as well as a misfortune to be unable to utter a prompt and decided no." And so, and I think it's kind of, you know, I'm gonna flop my flip because we've flip-flopped and we've actually created this beautiful framework as well. It is a great evil as well as a misfortune to be unable to utter a prompt and decided no. But I'm thinking now to this flight, and I'm thinking, how many times are we sitting next to somebody and we put the headphones on, or we pretend the headphones are, you know, are actually on, but they're not. And we just close ourselves off to the random conversation, the random stranger, the random yes. And in doing so, we miss out on the flight that changes everything. So even though we've discussed the power of no and saying no and focusing, etc. I got to come back full circle to little Corey, baby Corey, where just being brought up to say yes to everything has got to be the way to approach life. I have to believe that.
Well, and I think, like I said, I also think it comes back to perspective, meaning like for Corey, it's not like I pushed yes out of my life. I, in fact, am going for yes every day. And I would say, if you don't ask, the answer is always no. So I'm constantly pushing for yes. And I constantly say yes to the things I think are the right things. It's just, for me, I just had to start realizing I couldn't do it all. Like I couldn't do 1,000 things. So I had to at least start being a bit more indiscriminate about what an actual yes or no is. One of the things I want to do, and I haven't tried this yet, Joseph, but I'm thinking of doing it, is a month of no's. So like Shonda, I think her name's Shonda Rhimes, but she's a TV producer, and she did the book A Year of Yes or something like that. So I thought I want to try the opposite, try a month of no's. But I don't know how that'll play out if you say no to absolutely everything, because probably lose some friendships in the process, turn down opportunities that might be great. But I like the idea of trying it. So that might be next time we talk, I might be telling you what my experience was in doing a month of no's.
You can give up yes for Lent or something like that. I don't know. This has been great. I love how we've swum like water through various iterations and versions of it, because in some cases, of course, a no is when you say yes, you're saying no to something. When you say no, you're saying yes to something else, opening yourself up to the universe, swimming into and out of the secret and manifestation, but ultimately finding what works for you in life, getting to that better place, that better outcome, opening yourself up to possibility, to wonder, to awe, to being able to move the chains. That is, I don't know if that's the definition of synchronicity, but it certainly is, to me, the definition of being enlightened. Letting more light into your life, becoming smarter, wiser, and even with all the battle scars and the mistakes made, I feel like we've come full circle. But Corey, the last word, my friend, has to be yours. This is a new thing that I'm starting, which is, what is the question I didn't ask you? What's the one thing that you still want to share with people about the book, about life, about this conversation?
Well, I'll tell you the question. And I also, at the same time, will say, in fairness, you couldn't have known to ask this question, perhaps. But, and I will say, too, it's, as you said, it's on the screen. So if people want to check out thisisthebook.com, one of the things I didn't mention is it actually comes with 5 bonuses. So there's 5 instant bonuses you get immediately. One is actually a TEDx masterclass, a pre-recorded masterclass we did. We've had over 100 clients that have done TEDx talks. So a lot of people still want to do them. And so that's something that comes with it. And you get to attend some of our live events. So I wanted to add that in because that's all at thisisthebook.com. And you still get to buy it off your favorite retailer. But the one thing that I guess I would love to share is in the book, I named a chapter, The Mayfly. Now, I'm going to be very clear, Joseph. I didn't know really what the mayfly was. I knew the name, and that's as far as I knew. I knew what it was a thing, but I didn't know anything about it until an episode of Everybody Loves Raymond came on while I was rewriting the book. And Robert, the older brother, I think he's older. I don't even know if he's older or younger. I think he's older. Either way, Robert, it must be, because I think she always says my baby Raymond. But either way, Robert said something about the mayfly and how it only lived a short amount of time. So I dug in my heels to start doing some research because I was interested in that. And it turns out the mayfly, the male mayfly, lives less than 24 hours. Side note, which is not part of the story, but the female mayfly only lives 3 to 5 minutes. So her whole life is just to give birth to other mayflies. But the male mayfly, I thought 3 to 5 minutes doesn't help my cause for what I want to share. So I named a chapter The Mayfly. And then Treb, the older passenger, says to Robert, if you were the mayfly and you only had 24 hours to live, what would you do during those 24 hours? And the exercise here is to write down, how would you live your day? What's what I call an ideal or a perfect day for you? And so Treb gets Robert to go through all the stuff he'd do. And then after he said, well, Robert, let me ask you a follow-up question. Why aren't you doing those things now? And I think it's a powerful reflection point of, first of all, why don't we figure out what an ideal day is to us, write it down and start trying to live that way? But B, ask yourself, if this is all the time you had, what would you do? And why don't you do that more often? And so, again, I think that's what we can learn from the mayfly is during that 24 hours, it does only that which is its purpose. Now, its purpose might not be as grandiose or sexy as we'd like it to be, but it does that, its purpose, and then it dies. And so it just goes to that question of why don't we try to live on purpose with each 24 hours we have? And so, again, the question out of that, because you said, what's the question you didn't ask? It would be, why would you name a chapter the mayfly? Like, why would you name a chapter after a fly and give that much attention to a fly? That's the reason.
Well, actually, I happen to know that the mayfly was the ship that the pilgrims came to the New World on. So wait a second, that might have been a different mayfly. That is the question I didn't need to ask because you ended up asking it and answering it. I love the story. It is very, very close. You talk about synchronicity, journals, etc., to forever changed. In the book, I say there's a little blurb and it says, as I lay me down to sleep, I say, ask yourself these 5 questions. Number 1, did I show up for myself today? Number 2, did I show up for others today? Number 3, if today was the last day of my life, would it have been worthwhile? Number 4, if today was the only day of my life, would it have been worthwhile? And finally, if today was the best day of my life, would it have been worthwhile? And if the answer is no to any of those 5, go ahead and just change it and try again the next day, because that's the beauty of waking up every morning. Gives us another opportunity, not only to get it right, but more importantly, to go and buy and read The Enlightened Passenger. Corey, good luck with the book. It is a great approach, content, context, the works. And I'm going to go ahead and write in my journal as soon as we're done taping. And you know who else is going to be doing it as well? Not Bruce Lee, but actually Chuck Norris.
You are Chuck Norris approved.
He may have been actually the person in the photo that I put your head on. Take care, everyone. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you for watching the show about hope, positivity, optimism, and if there's time left over, a little bit of marketing with your host, multiple author, and global keynote speaker, Joseph Jaffe. If you like the show, tell a friend or two. Please subscribe to the show, and if you want to get inside news, previews of upcoming guests, and much more, visit josephjaffe.com/subscribe to sign up for the show's newsletter.
And despite the best ministrations of your wife, you still look ugly.